My name is Adrick Brock. I grew up in Toronto, and I moved to Vancouver to to see about a girl in the mid 2000s. And I stuck around here to go to university. And I'm just a recent graduate of the MFA program, and I finished there in spring of last year. The genres I work in are primarily fiction and nonfiction. And the main genre I've been working in these days is fiction, although I think it's just both. It's nonfiction and fiction. Um, for me, the bigger questions have been having to do with what length of fiction to be working in. I've been transitioning into working on a longer piece, having done my thesis in short stories. Now working on a bigger project, and also trying to open up some of my shorter nonfiction pieces into longer nonfiction pieces. Oh, the frustration factor. So, and to some degree, it isn't a joke. There is, when you're writing a piece of short fiction, it's really easy to let it go if it's not working. And it's also, there's a kind of innate sense of satisfaction in completing something that you started, say, 2 weeks ago or a month ago. And being able to kind of wrap up a story and to kind of close a character's arc within a short period of time. And when you start looking at novel, at least in my experience, it's been a challenging transition to make, where every 10th page you're actually trying to open it up as opposed to closing it down. Maybe it's a little more true to life, in some regard, you start working on short fiction, and in my experience working a lot in short fiction over the course of the MFA, it's possible that you kind of fall prey to thinking that everything can be closed down. And that's not to say that every short story I ever worked on or ever wrote had a perfect ending. But certainly when it's come to novel, it's just felt like a little more lifelike and messy in a way. A little less perfect, a little less closed at the end. So yeah, I think that's certainly something that has been a new challenge to the form of long fiction. I think probably like most writers, it was to read some really eye-opening authors, and I did that when I was in high school with writers like Bukowski and Kerouac, and Michael Ondaatje, even Margaret Atwood, I should know. And I think that they just stirred something in me that I was probably already there, which was this kind of large sense of imagination and this feeling that I could spend hours by myself and without a video game console and have the greatest time ever. And then to kind of see that translated in this more adult sense. Yeah, it made me start picking up the pen and doing my own version of Bukowski. Close enough, I would say. One thing that is probably a larger life lesson that extends far beyond writing is that I've come to realize things happen slower and are far more incremental than winning the lottery, for instance. So my dreams of publishing have been realized, and it's kind of no longer enough for me to kind of kick back on those laurels. Like, some small lit magazines have published my pieces, and that was a dream when I was in undergrad, and I'm noticing now I'm in a bit of a new dream space. The big bad world, where it seems like my dreams now, or my goals, are a little bit larger, and it is a little bit more daunting. So how are they lining up? I think pretty well. I kind of had it in my head that by the time I was 30, I might publish a book, and that probably won't happen right now. But that's okay. I've kind of reconciled that. One thing that I always remind myself when it gets frustrating is that like the most recent novel I read and enjoyed probably was written by someone who was in their 40s or 50s. I don't feel like a thematic writer in a lot of ways, and I'm not so embarrassed to say that. It seems like maybe that's the work of more intellectual writers. I think that certainly you read my work and you would be able to pinpoint a theme, but it's not really a starting place for me. So in a way, you tell me, you've read my work. you can say where the directions that it's heading in. I think for me, I tend to start more with characters and situations, And I don't tend to read or write with a theme in mind, although if I had to pick a few out, yeah, I think alienation is an important one, and also this within families, I think I deal with a lot of themes, like family themes within those relationships that have to do with concealment and hurt and reconciliation. Probably because we all come from a family. It does seem like some kind of universal place to start from. I think that for me and probably a lot of people, it's a very conflicted space, the family. And so, I have a friend who talks about going, writing to places where there are heat, or friction, conflict. And so that just innately becomes like a good place to start, I think. And also because, I'm still pretty young, I guess. I feel like a bit of a phony writing about married life. It feels a little more natural to write about families, children, parents. That seems like, at this stage of my life, a little bit closer to where I've come from. And I think that there's a bit more universal appeal in reading that kind of work, too. So what has my process for writing this first novel been like? I probably already used the word frustrating once, and I don't think that I'm alone, and I certainly don't want to fall prey to being like that cliched naysayer, but it certainly has been frustrating in some regard because I've noticed that there's a kind of disconnect between the kind of feelings of productivity that come with outlining and then the actual realities of turning that outline into the kind of flesh and bones of the actual piece. So I've gone through several outlining phases right now, and each time that has felt very productive. But when it comes time to actually carrying out that outline, I've been realizing that it's been really difficult to trust my outline or for the two to actually speak to one another. So that has been really the central challenge, I think, is to kind of go beyond just short story length or short story arc, I guess, and to kind of continue to open things up. And so for me, I started with one character, and so recently I've in an attempt to salvage what I've got going, is to open it up into three characters, so that I'm writing kind of more short story length sections, but the size and scale of the novel, is being carried out by just adding more characters, which has been kind of valuable for me. So that was an important discovery. Beyond outlining, I've found it really, really enjoyable to be able to sit down with a piece of writing that is already, say, 40,000 words long, as opposed to a blank page, which, as a short story writer, you're often starting from scratch, or you're writing 500 words of the final scene of your short story. So with the novel, there's really felt like there's a kind of momentum there, and also like a family in a way waiting for you at your desk, and the party's already going. You're just slipping back into the scene and kind of continuing the dialogue and continuing the action from there. I think that it's changing. It used to be the sentences, and I think that was because I was really interested in poetry when I was younger, and I was just startled by like a Michael Ondaatje line. And I think more and more, what really impresses me is this kind of ability of a writer to make me just want to continue to read. Which is not to say that those line by line little gems aren't what keep me going, but there's just this ineffable energy that I've been noticing in certain pieces. Like, what is it that keeps me reading this book, whereas I might put this other one down without going any further? And I think it has more to do with kind of tension and suspense. So what really impresses me is like this continual asking of questions, this posing of questions, and then this kind of slow drip of answers that an author is able to give you, so that you're getting enough to kind of satisfy the short-term questions that are being asked by the book, but you're just burning to know like the big answer at the end. just finished a book by Alex Olin called Inside, published in 2012. She's a Montreal-born writer who now lives in New York, one of those expats. And the book is set in Montreal, New York, and a little bit in Inuvik, believe it or not. And it was an enjoyable read. It was my second time reading the book. I did it because it would I knew it would be helpful for me when I was thinking about my own project, and it really was told through the lens of 4 characters, 3 different time frames. She's a short story writer as well, or she does both rather. So it was kind of like reading these 12 interconnected short stories. So each character got 3 or 4 different sections. And it was good. It was a really, really productive time for me, and I thought it was a really marvelous read, and I would highly recommend it. So, my advice to young beginning writers is probably just to stick with it. I mean, I remember the advice that I got when I was 17 and was lucky enough to take a writer's craft course in grade 12. And I had a teacher who wrote on the chalkboard, "Writers write." And it seemed like simple advice, kind of self-evident advice at the time, but I know that even for me, sometimes I can get caught up in just the kind of identity of being a writer and thoughts about it, and that can seem to take up more of my time than actually sitting at my desk and doing the work, because being a writer has romantic connotations, but actually sitting alone in a room and hammering away at your keyboard, far less romantic, but far more important than wearing a beret and smoking cigarillos.